Hello. It's great to see you. My name is David Banbury, and I'm vicar here at St. John's Church. I'm thrilled a bit to have you come along this evening. And with me, he'll introduce himself in a moment. He's a really good mate of mine, Pete Tonkinson, who's he'll describe himself and say about himself. But I'm really grateful to you, Pete, trolleying all the way here from Blackpool to be with us this evening. What basically me and Pete are going to do, we are a bit like Ant and Dec, but without the problems with alcohol abuse. Inappropriate joke, David. So we're going to do a bit of a double act and tell you some stories. Hopefully some of them are funny and entertaining. Some of them are a bit thought-provoking. We're just going to share some experiences of our time serving in the British Army. And this evening is part of a whole series of events we're doing here at St. John the Baptist Church, but also our whole village and community involved in. So you've probably seen the village having been kind of yarn bombed with knitted poppies exploding all over the place. Well, loads of people from church and the community have been knitting those. Hopefully you've also seen in some of the businesses or at Tesco's or Booths, other supermarkets are also available, an exhibition which we're calling Everyone Remembered. And it's lovely to have Richard with us, fighting his way out of a fleece, who has been just a marvellous force of nature, doing all the research about those folk who from Burscough and the surrounding area served in World War I and laid down their lives. So scattered around church in the bits of the pews where we've kind of fenced it off so you don't go and sit on somebody. And at the side, you will see those details of those amazing individuals and their service. You'll also perhaps spot some people sat amongst you who are there but not there. These perspex figures that to remind us of that, those from the military community who served us and helped defend our freedom. And I hope also you've had the chance to look at a little bit about the exhibition, and please do come back when you've perhaps got a bit more time. Have a look at a display about modern day conflicts or more recent conflicts, a little bit about World War II, and then behind me a whole load of stuff about World War I. So we've got a trench that we've built and a casualty clearing station. So lots of stuff has been put on by St. John's and by the community to help remember both the end and the centenary of the end of World War I and also those who gave their lives in World War II and other conflicts. We have produced a lovely, lovely glossy brochure. And these are so rare now, they're going for a lot of money on eBay. Thousands of these printed, voomf, they've gone. So, but they are available in quite a lot of shops have got them. And it basically will tell you everything that's happening to help us to remember. So the middle pages, lots of information about lots of things that are going on at St. John's. Because we've run out of them, we've got, this is the colourful, lovely, glossy one. This is a slightly scratty photocopy, but we've got copies of these at the back. Please do collect them, and please do kind of just anything that takes your interest, the exhibition or the film nights we're doing, or a play that we're putting on in here in church, which is just finished doing a sell-out run at the Edinburgh Fringe. Lots of things to help us remember. And obviously, on the 11th of November, we have the services, and indeed on the 10th of November as well, to actually gather and to remember. And please, it would be lovely if you were able to attend some of those things. That's quite enough sort of commercial stuff. I'll say a little bit at the end about some other things that we'd love to give you. But if we could just pop up the next slide, that would be wonderful. So this is me in uniform. What a handsome chap I am. And as you'll realise, although I was a soldier for 12 years, not always the most obedient of soldiers. Why wouldn't you have your photograph taken next to the big sign saying, no photography? It's a photograph of me when I was serving in Afghanistan, which must have been 4 years or so ago. Now, working in a field hospital. And what I'm going to do, what Pete's going to do, is we're going to share some stories of our experience serving with the army in a whole variety of different places. So that's me. I wasn't always a very good soldier, didn't always follow rules, whereas Pete was a fantastic soldier and always followed the rules-ish. Pete, will you come and just say hello to folk?
Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Pete. It's fantastic to be with you here tonight and to see just what an effort you're making here for remembrance, to remember those that have given their lives before us. Enough of that ugly mug. Let's get another one on. That's a proper soldier.
Hey.
Now we're talking. So this was me during my service. I spent 27 years in the infantry, in the local infantry regiment in the Queen's Lancashire Regiment. Not like 12 years and whatever he did there. But so we have a lot of banter like that. But what I would like to do is I'd like to tell you a little bit about my journey into the army and subsequently coming to faith while serving in the army. So if we could have the next slide up. There is me, scrawny 16-year-old lad. Yes, thank you very much, whoever that was, unless it was you. And my journey through life before joining the army was a little bit messy. I grew up in the care system. My mother left me at 2 years old, couldn't cope with life, disappeared and was never seen again. And I grew up in various foster homes. And I think it's fair to say that in my teenage years, I grew up quite angry with the world. I wasn't always the model pupil at school when I went. And I got myself mixed up in a few bad things in my teenage years because I grew up quite angry with the world. Then something happened. In 1982, we had the Falklands War, and it was televised. And it was one of these things that just captured my imagination as a young 15-year-old lad. It caught my imagination, and I thought, maybe that's what I'm looking for in life. So I went into the Army Careers Office, and I said, I want to join the Army. And after they'd finished laughing at me and basically sat me down, found out a little bit about me, told me to come back in 6 months' time when I was 16 years old, because you can't join at 15. But in them 6 months, I had to stay out of trouble with the police. So I learnt to run a bit faster, which was helpful when you're joining the army. And then I joined the army at 16 years old. And I spent my junior training years at the Infantry Junior Leaders Battalion in Shorncliffe. And I basically had a bit of a life shock going from this chaotic world of I'll decide what I want to do and not respect people to this world of respect and discipline that was installed into me. And initially it went really well. I finished my training with no problems at all. I ended up with my battalion. We were over in Germany, posted to Paderborn in West Germany as a young 16-year-old lad, just turning 17 at this point. And there I was in Germany, and things were going great. But we used to work hard and play hard in the army, and I tended to play a little bit harder than I worked, which got me in trouble quite a lot in my younger army years. And it's fair to say that I initially was not a model soldier. I was given 5 last chances by commanding officers, which is great because commanding officers change over every 2 years. So you get a couple of last chances out of each one of them. But I managed to cling on. I even spent a period of my time in the military prison for doing something very stupid. Again, getting mixed up with alcohol and things like that. And my life wasn't going really well. But as my career went on, and I struggled with this regime that I was in, something happened. I was in Omer in Northern Ireland on one of my operational tours, and I walked into the naffy shop, and there was this new naffy bird behind the counter. And I thought, oh, she's a bit of all right, so I'll chat her up. and that went well. And I invited her out, and that went well. And we went out for a meal. It was the 31st of October, many, many years ago. I know it's Halloween, but you have to get a soldier at the end of the month because he's got no money by the middle of the month. So get him on payday and you're all right. And we went out for a meal, and I thought, well, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life. My life's a bit of a mess. I'm probably going to get thrown out of the army very soon. I'm not a good soldier. I like alcohol a little bit too much, and I get in trouble quite a lot. And she said to me, oh, well, that's nice. I'm a Christian. I play the cello in a quartet. I've just finished studying at Belfast University, doing a bachelor's degree in theology, and I'm looking at a future life in ministry. And I was like, yeah, this is not going to work, is it? But the relationship went well, and I quite fancied her, actually. She was really nice, so I thought, well, I can put up with this. And then 3 weeks after going out with her, she asked me this dreaded question. She said, will you come to my church with me? And I was like, no. I was hoping she would never ask me, but she did. And I went to church, and I arrived at this community church. And one thing that struck me when I went into that church was just how nice people are. And I hadn't experienced this in my life because I wasn't a nice person. But they were really nice people, and they welcomed me. Cut a long story short, 9 months later, I gave my life to Jesus, and I became a Christian while serving in the forces. And then, making right decisions, my life kind of turned around. And if we put the next slide up, please. I got to the dizzy ranks of Regimental Sergeant Major. For those who don't know who that is, that's the guy who's in charge of discipline for the whole unit. Tables turning there. And after that was then commissioned to captain and retired as a captain from the armed forces in 2012. That lady who introduced me to Jesus, I was not going to let her go. I asked her to marry me 2 years later. She said yes. She is now my wife of 19 years and is currently a priest serving in Blackpool. And I work full-time with her in the church. That's a little bit of about my journey into faith. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you. We can just pop the next slide up.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, there's more.
Hey.
There's more. Hey, they're clapping me, not you. Sit down. My journey into the army was a bit different. I, rather like Pete, also was quite a bad lad as a youngster, got into a lot of trouble, and my life straightened out. But joining the army was a lot later on. I was working in churches and loving that, but then started working for a Christian charity. And it was a lovely job. I travelled the length and breadth of the country, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, doing all kinds of really great work that I loved. But because I was a vicar, I really missed having a congregation. And I really wanted to have a group of people who I could pray for and look after and just be amongst. And this daft idea came to me, why don't you join the army? I normally rely on Kathy, my wife, to be the voice of reason and sense in amongst the stupidity of the ideas that I come up with. But actually, when I talked to her about it, she was like, I think this might be right. I could tell you lots of stories about working out if this was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. But it came to a head when I was travelling up to Manchester to do a bit of work up in Manchester. And I just had all these thoughts about joining the army in my head. And I got so irritated by this. I did something really daft and stupid. I'd said to God, right, today, this is the big day. We're going to make a decision. I only am noticing things about the army on the telly and in the newspapers and this, that, and the other, just because, I'm thinking about it. It's a bit like, do you know sometimes where you get yourself a new car and you keep seeing cars like yours on the road? Do you know what I mean? You get the idea? And I was only noticing these army things because it was in my head. So I said, right, today I am in Manchester. I am going to count up how many things I see, and I find it hard to say this, to do with Manchester United. right? People wearing football shirts, club shops, posters, whatever it is. And how many things I see to do with the British Army. I'm only thinking about this army thing because, and I'm noticing things because I'm in my head and I need to get it out of my head and forget this. So I arrive in Manchester. I walk out of Manchester Piccadilly station. Past goes a Greater Manchester double-decker bus, bright orange thing, down the side of the big double-decker bus, join the British Army. And I'm just like, okay, I give up. I am going to do this. If you just press the down key. So I found myself with a new congregation. I also found myself working as a chaplain, as like a vicar in the army, with a new congregation, except this congregation had guns. And it was just that thing, if they don't like you, they could always shoot you. And I joined the reserve forces, what used to be the territorial army, but then found myself called up to do some spells of regular service. We have the next slide. And the first bit of regular service I did was working in a military field hospital in Iraq. And actually over there in the display is an Iraqi flag and the uniform that I wore when I was in Iraq. And a military field hospital is just like an NHS hospital. It's got all the same facilities. It's got accident and emergency department, except the accidents and the emergencies tend to be a little bit more severe than I cut my finger on opening a corned beef can. You're getting people who've been shot and blown up coming in. You've got wards. You've got kind of primary health care, you've got sexual health clinics, might say a little bit more about that later on. You've got physiotherapy departments, x-ray, everything that you'd find in a normal British hospital, except this is in a desert and it's all in tents. So anyway, I find myself spending 7.5 months in Iraq working in this hospital. And one of the things I love about the army is army humour. We'll have the next slide. This is me, and this is me outside 2 portaloos. Little blue kind of cubicles, a bit of a, known as the TARDIS, right? Bit gross, but they're like little blue boxes that look like the TARDIS, except you don't travel in time. You just go in there and you get out of there as quick as you can because they're smelly. But a couple of kind of humorous characters who I was working with thought actually these portaloos look just like a couple of confessionals that you might find in a Roman Catholic church. So it might be hard to see on the screen, but you'll notice one of them has got my name, Padre. It's an army name for a vicar, a priest, a minister serving in the army. And the other one has all the times when you can go in there for confession. Now then, portaloos, without getting too gross, get filled up, right, with human waste. And they need to be emptied. And there was a big debate, and I fully understand why it still rumbles on, about should we ever have got involved in Iraq? Should we have ever been part of forces going in there, etc., etc.? And the whole kind of business about whether chemical weapons. Did Saddam Hussein have chemical weapons? Did the insurgents have a capability of using chemical weapons? I can uniquely reveal to you today they did have chemical weapons. And I'm going to show you one of them now. Next slide. This vehicle is a chemical weapon. This is a honeysucker, except it does not suck up honey. What a bloke has to do in protective outfit is take a big long hose, go into one of the blue cubicles and suck out the contents. And all of that gets sucked into this big truck. And then that truck goes off the base and gets rid of its contents. Now, what happened one day is a group of insurgents decided to hijack one of these vehicles. Now, if you're going to go joyriding, I think you can pick a better vehicle than that, but that was their vehicle of choice. So they threw the driver out and off they went, driving in this vehicle. And then they got a bit bored about driving something that was very slow and smelt a bit bad. So they just abandoned it. And the British Army knew that it had been abandoned and thought, we better go and recover this. But when all the troops that had gone out there to kind of, look at this vehicle, they began to get a bit suspicious. Hang on a second. I think the insurgents might have booby-trapped this. There might be something, so when we open a door, it all goes bang. This is not good. This is not safe. So they kind of looked at it from a safe distance, had a big cordon so that nobody could get near the vehicle in case it exploded. And eventually they decided the risks were just too great. So rather than trying to recover the vehicle, they were going to blow it up. So, what they did, as they do in the army, they all look round to find the person of the most junior rank. There you are, Corporal Jones. Go and put some explosives on that and blow it up. So he goes off, and there's all kinds of sums and calculations for how much explosives you need to blow things up. And they're all like, how much do you think that weighs? Oh, okay. So they pack more and more explosives on this. And then, hang on, we've got a box of this left over. We don't want to take that back to stores. Why don't we just pack that on there as well? So there's this big security cordon of soldiers with kind of rifles and weapons, keeping all the civilian population back. Here is the honeysucker that is not filled with honey, packed with explosives. And then somebody wires it all together and has the joy of pushing a button. At which point the chemical weapon detonates, and there is just this geyser of human waste and blue fluid that fills Portaloo, that goes up in this beautiful fountain. And as fountains do, it began to spread out and cascade, and then because of gravity, return to Earth. At which point the British Army realizes that their security cordon is not far enough back. And what happens is a whole bunch of soldiers are immediately turned into Smurfs. They are completely blue. And they all have to come to the hospital for treatment. Their treatment: to stand outside in just their boxer shorts while a whole bunch of other people go at them with bog brushes, scrubbing away to get rid of all the blue mess. So, for all that we know about Iraq, all the things about the rights and wrongs of that conflict, I can say with absolute certainty, I did see chemical weapons being used, and you're looking at it. We'll have the next slide up. Here we go, Pete. Your turn. Tell us a story.
So let me bring you back down to earth a little bit better than that honeysucker did. One of the things that I struggled with as a soldier and a Christian in the forces was this morality. I'm in the infantry. My job in the infantry is to close with the enemy and destroy them when they're attacking us, which means that occasionally we may have to take another life. This became a bit of a dilemma for me, and I struggled with it a lot. And I used to sit with my padre and we'd talk about this and we'd pray about this. But then there was an incident that happened that I want to explain to you about that kind of brought it all into perspective for me. We'd been in Iraq for a fair period of time. This was in 2008, and I'd just been promoted to the rank of Regimental Sergeant Major, which is quite a responsibility when you're out on operations. And we had information that the insurgents in Basra had a bomb factory in one of these big flat areas called the Shia Flats. Nobody liked patrolling the sheer flats. They were horrible places to patrol because there were loads and loads of places that the insurgents could hide and shoot at you and throw nasty things at you. So nobody really liked going into the sheer flats. But we had to go and take on this bomb factory. So there was a lot of planning and preparation went into it. You can see there I'm holding what looks like a model aircraft. Actually, that was an unmanned air vehicle that was able to fly from our base over Basra and take live photographs of the area that we were going to go into battle to try and get hold of this bomb factory. If we move on to the next slide. A lot of planning and preparation went into place. You can see a huge model of the sheer flats running down the middle there. 650 troops were taking on this mission. We were working alongside the Americans. And my responsibility was to make sure that our soldiers were ready on the morning to go and do this task. I remember clearly the morning, the sun was just coming light. It was about 4:30. It got light really, really early there. And the next slide will show you the vehicles that we used to use. These were old, what we call 432 armoured fighting vehicles. And you can see on the side, they've got like zigzag stuff on the side of them. That's actually explosives packed down the side of the vehicles. But it was very clever explosives, because what it was designed to do was when somebody fired a rocket at your armoured fighting vehicle, they would hit the explosives, which would then detonate, and it would blow the rocket away from the vehicle. So it was offering you protection, but actually you're carrying a whole load of explosives down the side of your vehicles. It's called explosive reactive armour. It's a brilliant bit of kit. So we're lined up. It's 4:30 in the morning. We're about to go into battle, and we were expecting casualties, possibly deaths. This was going to be a bit of a messy battle. I remember walking with the commanding officer down the back of the vehicles, and I got to about the third vehicle, and somebody said, "Excuse me, sir." And I went to the back of the vehicle, and it was a sergeant in the vehicle, and he said, "Lads have been chatting in the back of the vehicle here." And I said, "All right, yeah." And I'm like, "Are you okay, guys? You ready to go?" And all that kind of stuff. And they said, "We want to ask you something, sir, but we're a bit embarrassed." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Would you pray for us?" And I was like, wow. I mean, I'd been openly as a Christian. I was proud of who I was in the army, but it wasn't always the best place to be a Christian. There's a lot of banter in the army. And a lot of, having a go at each other. I mean, my group of soldiers were called the God Squad, so that's who we were. But this group of soldiers at the back of this vehicle had asked me to pray with them, and I felt really honoured to do that. And I prayed with this group of soldiers. I prayed for courage, I prayed for wisdom, and I prayed for something that we call courageous restraint. And that means it's more courageous not to fire your weapon unless you really have to do so. Courageous restraint. And we prayed about that. And then I walked past the next vehicle, quite blown away by this fact. And I heard, "Excuse me, sir, can we have a bit of that?" And I had this privilege that morning of walking down our battle group's vehicles and praying with soldiers. And it was at that moment that God said to me, "You're in the right place. You are where you need to be at this point in time." We need Christians in all walks of life, because people, when they're at their wits' end and when they're struggling, need to hear about something that is going to help them. And at this point in time, for those lads in the back of those vehicles, it was prayer, and they asked for prayer, and it was a privilege to do that. And it was that point I realized that's why I am where I am at this point in time. So we went into Basra. We came across a bit of the enemy, and we had a bit of a scuffle. The next slide will show us in Basra, going through the streets of Basra, got into the sheer flats, and actually, fortunately for us, the insurgents that were there were not up for much of a scrap that day. When they saw the force of what was about to come into the sheer flats, they decided their best option would be to get away as quickly as they could. So they weren't up for much of a fight. Next slide. We found the bomb factory. This is the kind of stuff that they're making. It's really nasty stuff. Explosives inside a Coke can, surrounded by ball bearings with a detonator device in. And if that goes off near you, it's not very pleasant. And it causes really bad casualties. We got in there and we secured all of this stuff. Every one of those could have been aimed at one of our soldiers. And we were thrilled to be able to capture that bomb-making area there. Next slide is me coming back in, big smile on my face. We'd finished the battle, nice blue skies, and the joy was that nobody got killed. Nobody was killed that day. I had 2 casualties. I had a soldier with a broken leg who closed the armoured fighting vehicle onto his leg and broke his shin. And I had another lad who, once we got back to the vehicle park, thought he was being a bit of a clown doing a dance on top of a vehicle and fell off it and hurt his back. But for that day, for us, those soldiers needed prayer. They received prayer, and it worked for them. But for me, it meant that I knew I was where I was meant to be at that time as a Christian in the forces.
Great stuff. I know, they love you, Pete. I'm just the support act. Now, interestingly, that photograph of that bomb factory you saw, the contents, and that explosive device that Pete described, that was one of the common things that the insurgents were making. They'd have a set of explosives, and then they'd cover it, surround it by ball bearings. It was like shrapnel. And then when this detonated, in every direction. If we just put the next slide up, that'd be great. Are we all right? What you're about to see on the screen, hopefully if the thing hasn't frozen, is I'm surrounded by poppies at the moment, and it's heading towards Remembrance Sunday. And one of the first things I did when I was out in Iraq in 2006 was take a Remembrance Sunday parade. It was just like a Remembrance Sunday service, just the same sort of thing as we're about to have, here in Burscough. But it was on operations with soldiers, with warfare and fighting going on. If you need to restart the PowerPoint, what have you, that's fine, and we'll come back to it. It was an incredibly poignant occasion. We went, gathered in the parade square, had a service, we laid the wreaths, we had the last pose, and it was very, very, very moving. And then we all went off to lunch, and we're all having a lovely lunch. And then over the loudspeakers, there was an announcement, major medical incident, all personnel to the hospital. And what had happened is a group of soldiers and Marines, who were Navy personnel but light soldiers, had been doing a patrol, but on boats, on the river that goes kind of through the middle of Basra, the Shatt al-Arab waterway. And they'd been going underneath one of the arches of one of the bridges when an explosive device that had been hidden there had detonated, packed with ball bearings. And the casualties were, 4 people were killed straight off, and then some absolutely awful injuries. Now, when this was called, I'd only been out there about sort of 12 days, something like that. I'm like, what the dickens do I do? And I'm thinking, right, I'm going to go up to the emergency department, and I'm just going to find a little corner, and I'm going to just pray. That's what I can do. There are amazing medical staff who do absolutely extraordinary things. Their ability to cope with acute trauma and catastrophic injuries is amazing. I'm not going to get in the way and mess that up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get quietly in a corner, and I'm just going to pray as they battle to save lives. 4 have already been killed, but other people have also been really badly injured. Don't put the slide up yet. The next slide you're going to see is a simulation of casualties. What I want to tell you is actually what you're looking at is a very large amount of tomato ketchup, right? So actually that's what you're looking at. So if we could put that slide up, that would be good. And what you see there is somebody, they've got a penetrating chest wound, they've got a particular seal to sort of try and support their lungs and stop them collapsing. They've got a traumatic bleed on their leg. You'll see a little black strip. That's a tourniquet that has been applied to stop someone losing all their blood. And when I was in the emergency department, as the people who were killed, they were killed, but people coming in on stretchers, casualty after casualty after casualty, looking an unbelievable mess. And I'm stood there by the fridge, and I prayed probably one of the most shameful prayers I've ever prayed, alongside occasionally praying for equalisers for Sunderland, my favourite football team. My prayer was, "Dear Lord, don't let me faint, because I'm a bit squeamish and I am not good with blood." But I knew I needed to be there. And I didn't want to do is just slowly slide down the fridge and be a trip hazard on the floor. So that was my first prayer. My next prayer was for these poor people who had sustained life-changing injuries, massive sort of facial disfigurement, catastrophic damage to their limbs. And I'm praying for them. And I'm praying for families who are about to have somebody turn up on their doorstep and say, "We're really sorry to tell you, your son, and in this case, your daughter, your wife, your husband, has been killed in Iraq." Knowing that 4 people within 24 hours were going to get a visit saying that their loved one had been killed. And also other families were about to be told about terrible injuries to their loved ones. The amazing thing was that actually these amazing medics with all their skills saved the lives of those with appalling injuries. And once the incident had been dealt with, hours of treating people and taking them off to operating theatres and all the rest of it, what you do is then, and any of you who've worked in the health service and dealt with sort of big injuries and kind of major incidents will know that you get together and you have a bit of a debrief of what's happened. We'll just pop the next slide up. That would be great. And when we did that, we had a really high-ranking naval officer, a commander, running the emergency department, and he was saying, "How did it go? How did we treat the casualties? Were we able to log the details of their injuries? Was the supply of blood coming, as quickly as we need it? Were we able to get lab results right? Did X-ray work okay?" So we were basically just checking all the details to say, how did we do? How was it? How could we do this job better? And what was really interesting was at the end of all these medical experts sharing their experience and kind of, how well we'd done and what had gone right, what had gone wrong, learning lessons. This commander points at me and he says, "Padre," that's, say, army name for somebody who's a vicar in the army, "how about you? What have you got to say?" And I'm like, what do I say? I didn't faint. Hooray, And I just said, "Amazing job. I know we've got lessons to learn, but you dealt with a really complex medical incident with such skill and professionalism, etc., etc., etc." And I said, I felt a bit useless. I was here basically in case anybody was about to die, and I could just go and be with them if they were about to die, hold their hand and pray for them. And I was here basically praying for you folk, for you to be able to do your job as well as you possibly can. And he said, well, it's funny, I've been, head of emergency departments in all kinds of different places, dealt with terrible, terrible incidents, big road accidents, stuff in the army. And I have never known an emergency department be so calm and so sort of peaceful, even in the midst of all the stuff we're doing. And he said, I think it was you and praying. And he said, I'm not a religious bloke. I'm not into that kind of stuff. But I know having you here made a difference. So every time we have an emergency, every time we have casualties in here, I want you stood by that fridge praying. And I've got to say, in 2006, we had an awful lot of casualties. I, in that time, dealt with 36 people who actually lost their life, both coalition forces, British troops, and also people who were insurgents who lost their life. But I was dealing with 36 fatalities alongside, goodness me, hundreds of people with really serious injuries. But every time we had casualties, I was there by the fridge praying. And it just struck me, just like Pete's story, that actually, whether we're, people of faith or not, sometimes when the chips are down and tough stuff's happening, praying seems like a good idea. We'll have the next slide up. Now then, as I've mentioned, occasionally my shameful prayers have been as a Sunderland supporter, red and white stripes. I've prayed for equalisers. I am a devoted Sunderland fan. Our worst kind of rivals are Newcastle United. Rather than looking sophisticated in red and white stripes, a bit like a deck chair, you dress up like a barcode or a badger or something. But the great thing about the British Army is, in spite of you all being different people with different kinds of backgrounds and experiences, there is a bond that brings you together. So goodness me, even a Sunderland supporter can be really good mates with somebody, deluded as they are, who supports Newcastle United. And there is a bond of friendship that is just so deep and so profound. And what makes that very difficult is what happens when your friends are then killed. We'll have the next slide up. One night I was in bed, I was fast asleep, and suddenly I heard a really loud bang. And in fact, I got so fed up of getting out of bed because things were going bang in the night and we were getting attacked and rockets were hitting our base. I got rid of my bed and I just had a mattress on the floor. And so when things went bang, I got really good at this. I used to roll out of bed, roll into my body armour, put my helmet on, lie on the floor, which you were supposed to do, and go back to sleep. I was doing good soldiery things, but able to still get me rest. But this really loud bang happened. I'm into my body armour, I'm on the ground, helmet on, just starting to drift off to sleep. When I suddenly became aware of lots of people were moving around in the accommodation near to me, where some of the doctors and the surgeons slept. And I thought, heavens, actually, I think I better get up. I think something's happened. And in my sort of foggy state in my head, I'm thinking, that was a really loud bang, which meant a rocket has landed really close by. But I don't think it has. Because even though it was a really loud bang, it sounded like it was a long way away. And as I'm waking up, I'm trying to work out what's gone on. Anyway, lots of other people are getting up. So I think, right, get myself dressed, head off to the emergency department, find out what's happened. And what I found out was there had been an explosion, but it had happened in the middle of Basra, which was several kilometres away from our base. And the insurgents, we saw the vehicles that Pete was driving around in the 432s. There's another vehicle, looks a bit like it, called a Warrior armoured fighting vehicle. Incredibly thick armour. And the insurgents were desperate to blow one of these up, to basically show that the British forces, look, to be honest, you're not safe. Don't matter what you're driving around in, you're not safe because we can blow one of these things up. And they'd invented this particular kind of device. I won't get into all the technicalities of it, but they'd planted it in such a way that when it exploded underneath the vehicle, penetrating the thinnest armour, and it had penetrated the armour and then exploded. And you just wouldn't believe, and I'm not going to describe it, what had happened. But actually, in that vehicle were two of my friends who were army medics who'd gone out on patrol to actually help other soldiers provide medical cover in case any incident had happened and some stupid soldier had shut his leg in a door and needed a splint applied, or some clown had fallen off something and hurt their back. That's why they were there. They weren't there to fight. They weren't there to harm anybody. They were just there to help people. I went off, won't go into detail, with people from my unit to help with the recovery of this vehicle. And I went to pray at the back of this vehicle. And the doors were open, and the sight that I saw was just horrendous. And these were my friends. And in that photograph, inside that coffin is Private Ella de la Gauche, 19-year-old. And her best friend, the lass at the front, is carrying her coffin. And in the same incident, Corporal Chris O'Neill was also killed. And it was an unbelievably difficult time, because even though we lost friends, I knew that that same evening, patrols were going out on the ground, and we still had to carry on doing our job. We'll have the next slide. And I think probably the hardest things I've ever done, and I've done it far too many times in the British Army, is help with a repatriation ceremony. It is an unbelievably moving event where comrades, friends gather with all the kind of pomp and ceremony that the army does so well. But in the midst of that, basically to conduct part of a funeral service and see coffins loaded onto an aircraft, flown back to the UK, and where loved ones are going to receive back their family members, but not alive and well, and give them a big hug, but actually in a coffin. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to deal with. And sadly, I've done it many times. So that's quite a somber thing to share. Could we just pop the next slide up and just see what's next? Yeah, I think we'll just pause for a moment. We'll just do, have we got a bit of a roving mic? Have we got a roving mic? We have. What we're going to do is we'll take some questions now, and then we've just got a few more stories to share. That was a somber one. We've got some funny ones coming up. But just in case there's some questions, Pete, do you want to come up, that you want to ask us at this point, we'd be delighted to kind of hear those. Anything? People want to raise a hand or anything? I warn you, if you don't raise your hands, we're just going to keep telling you stories. And there are some funny ones coming, don't worry. Are we all right to keep ploughing on? We're going to... Oh, no. Thanks, Eddie. Do you want to just grab the... Sorry. We're over here, John. We're over here, in this location.
Were there any opportunities to actually bring soldiers to Christ who didn't know him?
Story coming up, Eddie. Wait, just wait a little moment and I'll tell you a little bit of a story. Any other questions?
To Pete.
Pete, what was your worst experience in Afghanistan or Basra? Iraq?
I think the worst experience is when you are in a position where soldiers look up to you and look for guidance. And there are occasions where things just get a little bit messy, especially when you're out on patrol and something goes drastically wrong and people look up to you and say, what are we going to do? And you have to make decisions that affect soldiers' lives. These are the kind of things that we are called to do as leaders of men. And sometimes the decisions you make result in people getting injured because you just don't know what's around the next corner. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things for me, was being in a position of responsibility, but not just for myself, but for soldiers, some of them that were very young as well, looking up to say, okay, boss, what are we going to do now? Okay, this is the plan, and you have to go formulate a plan and take that plan on. But just the weight of responsibility to do that can be quite overwhelming at some points. But it's a job that you're trained to do, and sometimes you make decisions and things go wrong, and then you've got to reformulate the plan and make another decision and keep going on like that. So that was probably one of the hardest things, I would say, during my career.
Great. Why don't you tell us about this slide and a few more?
So it kind of leads into a little bit like that. It's like I spent half of my army career without faith. And it was about being able to trust in what I knew, my own strength. After half of my career, I then obviously decided that I was going to give my life to Christ, but I didn't walk alone anymore. And I used this as a strength for me. And to be able to lean on Jesus to walk alongside me, I was able to do that. We were responsible for hearts and minds. All these bad things that were happening to us, and you've heard some pretty horrific stories that, David's just told there. It was still our responsibility to go out onto those streets, into a place that is messed up, and to reach out to people on those streets and do what we call hearts and minds. We were there to try and make their country a better place. And this responsibility of understanding that not everybody out there is a bad person. There are a lot of good people out there that needed our support. So hearts and minds was certainly something that we worked on quite a lot. Did I lean on Jesus? Yes, I did. I leaned on Jesus a lot. And did it help me? Yes, it did. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a story of when we first got to Basra. If you put on the next slide. This is what we lived in. This is about 8 kilometers outside the center of Basra. It's a tented city, and that's what we lived in as soldiers. So if you live in a tent, your protection above you is not always brilliant. And the insurgents quickly cottoned onto this, and they thought, well, one way that we could probably attack the soldiers is to fire rockets into the base from Basra. And they got quite good at this. The next slide will show you the kind of things that they used to throw at us. There's a message on there in Iraqi. I'm not sure what the message is, but I'm quite convinced it's not, "Have a good day, sir." These are the kind of messages they used to write on their rockets and fire them into the bases. We knew that this was going to be a big issue for us because we'd seen previous tours have this kind of thing go on. So I got together with the Padre. Being a Christian in the army, there's not a lot of you, funnily enough, in that walk of life. And I think when we first got to Iraq, and we held a Sunday service, the Padre had his own tent, which he turned into a chapel. It was lovely, and he called it the Tabernacle, place of worship. And when we used to hold services in there, you used to find that there was me and the Padre, and about 4 Fijian soldiers, and maybe 1 officer in this big tent, the size of this room. And they would be the people that would gather to pray at the beginning of the tour. And one of the things that we decided to do was that we would prayer walk our tented city. So we got together and we walked around the perimeter of this tented city and we prayed. And we prayed for God's protection over the soldiers that lived within this base. During that 6-month tour, 353 rockets were fired at our base, and not one soldier was killed. The anti-aircraft guns that were in position in the camp to shoot these rockets out of the sky were doing an amazing job. But actually what I had this vision of was that each of the 4 corners of this tented city were these angels with baseball bats. And every time a rocket was fired, they were like, straight out of the sky, knock these rockets out of the sky before they could land in camp and injure our soldiers. So did faith play a big part? It certainly did. And tell you what else happened at the end of the tour. By the end of the tour, that tent that had 5 people in praying at the beginning, there was standing room only. Standing room only. And I remember, yeah, thank you, it's pretty impressive, it's incredible. Now, not all of those soldiers have continued in a walk of faith, but what they did, in a time where they needed it, they turned to somebody that they thought could help them. And for them, that was Jesus. 15 soldiers lined up taking communion at the end of a service in a tent in Iraq, turning to God in times of need.
I'm also going to tell you a rocket story. I said that a field hospital, I worked in one in Iraq, I worked in one in Afghanistan. It's just like a hospital here. And one of the things it has is a pharmacy. If we put the next slide up, that'd be great. And what happened one day is some civilian contractors who worked on this base drove up to the hospital because one of them needed to pick up their prescription. So one of them nipped in to get their prescription, and their mate stayed in the car. Now then, while he was sat in the car and his mate is in the hospital, the alarms go off to say a rocket attack is about to happen. And this poor bloke in the car is like, what do I do? What do I do? And he is dithering about whether to get out of the car, stay in the car, whatever, when a rocket comes onto the base. And if you can see, and I ought to have a long pointy stick, the rear window, it went through the rear window of his vehicle. Pop the next slide on. And it travelled through the vehicle and out that side of it. Now, you see where there's a headrest and then a headrest missing? He was sat in that seat, right? If we just see the next slide. And that's what the other side of the vehicle looked like. But the rocket did not detonate. So it went in through one window, through the vehicle, out through that sort of post, the B post. He was sat in that seat, and he did need to be admitted to or taken into the hospital for 2 reasons. One is he had 2 small scratches on the back of his head from flying glass. The other reason he needed to come into the hospital is so that he could have some new underwear. Because this had been quite a scary experience for him. And I also had a couple of scary experiences. Pop the next slide on. This is my accommodation. Unlike the tents, I was given what was called Corrimec, which is basically a shipping container, just like those big metal boxes you see on back of wagons, and you sleep in that. And if you notice, in the top left-hand corner, can you see just a little dot of white? Yeah? And then if you look, sort of in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little dent, and actually what is a pile of sand. Can you all see that? Yeah? And that was a rocket that came into our accommodation, came through the roof, which was supposed to be a sunscreen. It wasn't protective. It just basically stopped you getting too hot. That didn't work. Passed through along, missed the accommodation, missed that unit which people were sleeping in, and embedded itself into a blast wall, which is basically a big canvas bag with wire mesh around it, filled with sand. And again, it didn't detonate. But I was about 25 meters away from that. And then, a little while later, one did land, detonated, and that's a little bit of shrapnel from that rocket, which burst in all kinds of directions. And again, just as Pete said, it didn't hit anybody and didn't harm anybody. But it is extraordinary. You know, people did get hurt, people did get injured. But amongst all those rockets that were landed on our base, thanks to Pete's prayers and other people's prayers, boom, they're getting knocked out the park. And in spite of shrapnel flying around and landing near accommodation, actually people weren't getting hurt. Just pop the next slide on, because I can't remember what's happening. Pete, tell us a war story.
This is a story about having to trust God. I'm going to take you back to my first tour in Iraq, which is 2003. And it was just after the war. The war had, to go in and fight the Iraqi army had finished. And we were the peacekeeping force that were dropped in to try and bring order back to Basra city, which you could imagine was just in chaos. It's got no police force, it's got no law courts, it's got people running around with weapons everywhere. There was a massive petrol shortage. There was people dying over petrol pumps and all sorts of stuff. It was a really difficult tour. And it was a tour where you may have seen in the news there was 6 RMP soldiers were killed in one incident. It was that tour as well. And it was probably the toughest time that I've ever had over a period of 6 months whilst being in the army. But this was the day before going home. And the new unit had come in, the new regiment was in. We'd done our handover, I'd handed over to my commander. My ammunition was now unloaded. It was in. I wasn't going back out the base again, this was it. The next vehicle I was going to get in was going to take me to Basra Airport by other people guarding me and my troops as we then got on a Hercules plane and flew out of Iraq to safety. My safety was in everybody else's hands now. Wonderful. One more night's sleep. And then the commander who I handed over to came to me and he gave me a knock in my bed and he said, "Pete, I've got an issue." And I said, "What's the problem?" And he says, "I've got to take the company commander to battle group headquarters, which is in the middle of Basra in a different base to ours." We were living in Basra at this time. And I can't remember the way. And I was like, "What?" And he said, "You know the safe routes." He said, "Would you be able to guide us just one more time? One more patrol, that's all I'm asking you." And I was like, oh my goodness. Right, okay, no problems. So get my ammunition out, reload it up. I got my another guy who came with me as a close protection for me. Now I'm with these group of soldiers that I've not trained with now, and we're going to take them out. We're going to take them across Basra city to Basra headquarters. And these were the vehicles we used at the time. They were called snatch vehicles. Actually, they weren't brilliant for Iraq because they wouldn't stop very much. They were great for Northern Ireland. In the early days of Northern Ireland, we used to patrol around in these. And you can see that there's 2 guys up the top there with the head out the top of the vehicle. That was our armoured protection, 2 guys with rifles. And we set off on this patrol to go to the base. And I remember praying before I left camp. And I said, "Lord, I thought this was it, but obviously it's not. I'm asking for you one more time, Lord, during this tour, please look after us and our soldiers as we go out and do this." So we were driving in to the centre of Basra and we were going down these narrow streets where there's high buildings. And if you put up the next slide, these were the people that we were against at the time. These were the insurgents. And you can imagine those guys there, that if they just dropped those weapons and walked around the corner, they just looked like normal civilians. But they used to pick up their weapons out of shops when they knew there was a patrol coming, get onto the roofs of the buildings and take every opportunity to try and ambush our vehicles whenever they could. Unbeknown to me, they'd laid an ambush, and as we patrolling down the street towards the base, it just let loose. They were on both sides of the street firing down at us. We were in these vehicles. And they weren't brilliant vehicles. They were firing RPGs at us as well, rocket propelled grenades. And we got ourselves into a firefight. And I'm in a firefight with these lads. When we say a firefight, it's like shooting at each other. The insurgents are shooting at me and we're shooting back at them, trying to break clean away from these vehicles because these were the target, get into some cover, formulate a plan, and try and get out of that mess. It was a crazy time. These were soldiers that I'd not trained with, so, they had their commander with them and that, but I was out in command of this patrol. We broke clear and we got out of that situation. The next slide will show you what happened to one of our vehicles that was later recovered. We couldn't recover it there on the scene. We had to go back out and recover that vehicle later. But actually, what we found when we got back to camp, the QRF was called out, Quick Reaction Force, recovered us from that situation. We got back to camp. And I remember this vehicle being dragged into camp. And I looked at this snatch vehicle that we were in, and it was riddled. It looked like a sieve, this thing. And not one person on that patrol got hit by a single bullet. We managed to clear those vehicles, extract ourselves out of that situation. And for me, because I have faith, that to me was a signal that in times of need, God was there to protect me. God had bigger plans for me in what we're doing now in these days. And at that point of time when I called on him, he came through for me. And it was an incredible story of trusting in God. And I got on the plane the next day, very relieved.
If we could just pop the next slide up, that'd be great. Now then, that was about the end of Pete's tour. When I was finishing in Iraq, it was a summer season in Iraq. Temperatures are like 40 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit is very hot. It's baking hot. Whatever summer we had this time, whenever we've gone, it's really hot. Just add 10, 15 degrees to that. And the commanding officer came to me and went, Padre, we need to celebrate the end of the tour. We need to have a bit of a big party, and you're going to organise it. And I'm like, thank you very much indeed, sir. And I'm thinking, what the dickens can we do? And then I had this stupid idea, and I thought, it is so hot, and we are surrounded by sand. Why don't we have the Winter Olympics? That'll be fun. So I have to hold my hands up and confess I misappropriated a little bit of Ministry of Defence equipment. So some planks of wood and some army boots got nailed together, so the planks had these boots fastened to them. And what we did is we had the giant slalom. These teams of soldiers were trying to work their way around a slalom course. Next slide. We also had a curling competition. I hadn't got any ice, just sand, but we did have big medicine balls, heavy things that people were rolling down the rink, and we even had people with brooms going like that, doing curling. And then, obviously, why wouldn't you have a bobsleigh competition as well? Pop that on, stick a couple of army nurses in a wheelbarrow, and take them across some sand dunes. So we had a brilliant time. And while I was planning all of this, I thought it would be great to have a really big sort of grand finale. Wouldn't it be lovely if we had a snowball fight? The only difficulty with this is we obviously haven't got any snow. But I thought, right, well, what can we do instead? Why don't we have water bombs that we throw at one another? That'll be fun. And then I'm thinking, we haven't got any water bombs. What can we use instead? At which point, I suddenly thought of the sexual health clinic. Some of you might be a little bit ahead of me right now. So anyway, that was part of the hospital. Soldiers, they can be naughty boys and girls. They can start having sexual relationships with all kinds of people. They pick up sexually transmitted infections. They need to be treated. So we had a sexual health clinic. So anyway, I used to go and visit these people. I've got to tell, no, I won't tell you about making Christmas decorations. That's probably a little bit X-rated. But anyway, I used to go visit them, have a cup of tea with them, have a bit of a chat. Anyway, so I thought, excellent, I've got an idea. So I went into the sexual health clinic. I went, oh, hello, Padre, do you want a cup of tea? Yes, please, kettle on, we're having a bit of a chat. And I went, actually, I'm kind of here to see you in a professional capacity. The shocked looks. Suddenly, their professional kicks in. All right, Padre, well, we better have a look at you. Can you undo your trousers? No, I say. No, I don't. I haven't got any diseases. Everything's fine. I would just like some condoms. At which point they say, well, okay, Padre, yeah, we can do that. I know you're happily married, and I know your wife's not here. We're not here to judge you, but we are. And this seems a little bit inappropriate. And I'm like, oh, no. I don't need any condoms like that. No. It's nothing like that. I just need them, and I can't tell you why I need them. And they're all like, don't believe you, Padre. You're going to be a naughty boy, and we are slightly shocked, but we're hiding it. And they went, okay, whatever you want to do with this, it's your business, but we know what these things are used for, but we can provide them for you. How many do you need? Can you do me 500? And they're like, what? And I'm like, don't worry, it'll be fine. I just need 500 condoms. That's all I need. And they're like, okay, here they are. Here's your box. Now get out of here, you sex pest. Anyway, what I want to do is draw attention to an issue of medical confidentiality, because any engagement with the hospital medical record should be absolutely confidential. All I will say is I walked into the canteen, into the cookhouse, and it was like a scene from a Western. All the talking stopped. The piano player, if we'd had one, no longer playing. Dead silence. And everybody is staring at me. And I'm like, the story's got out, hasn't it? Anyway, next slide. That is the water bomb fight. So we filled all these condoms full of water. We had big buckets of them, and we just went absolutely crazy because we were going home. We were going to be safe. And it was just absolutely amazing because flying through the air, these wibbly-wobbly, balloony type things, flying through the air, and people getting absolutely drenched. But it was just absolutely fabulous. It was just such a release of kind of fun and laughter after what had been a really difficult time. And I was no longer seen as some kind of sex pest who had indecent designs on lots and lots of people. If we just pop the next slide up, that would be great. I think we'll just jump on a little bit. I think we better. Is that all right? Hetty, you asked questions about people exploring faith and wanting to find faith. And actually, no, Pete, come on. Just you do what? We've already had the question. What for you? Looking back on 27 years in the British Army.
Yeah.
What's the thing that sort of stands out? I know you'll have lots and lots of memories, but particularly about, obviously you've shared about your faith and also stories of being in conflict. What did you learn from your time in the army?
I think the biggest thing that I learned, certainly after becoming a Christian, was about trusting in God. And through that trust, I was able to find hope, courage, and a future. Certainly by giving my life to Christ and becoming a Christian, it was one of the things that helped me the most, was that knowing that I was no longer ever going to be alone. and that I always have this God, through his son Jesus Christ, who died for me on the cross, for me. He would be there for me for the rest of my walk in life. I think one of the things that I picked up from being in the army is just that God has a plan for our lives. And part of that plan was that God was able to use what happened to me over my military career to shape me to who I am today. And one of those things is that I have now a transferable skill. A transferable skill from the army is not about I'm able to fire a great rifle and take people out. That transferable skill is that of one that through the army you had to have courage, you had to be robust, and you had to trust in people for those that you served with. Out here now in ministry, working alongside my wife, working in an area of deprivation, I need to be robust. I need to have courage to tell people about this hope that can change their lives. And I need to have this faith to do that. And for me, I think that's been the biggest part of my journey, from before being a Christian to being a Christian today. This transferable skills. One of my favourite Bible passages is from the book of Joshua 1 verse 9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be disheartened. For wherever you go, the Lord will be with you. And he walks with me now in my faith.
Fantastic. Right. Lovely, Pete.
Thank you.
I'm going to share. Clap him again. Don't bother clapping me. I'm not upset by this. Eddie, you asked a question about people perhaps wanting to explore faith. This is running a short course. It's called Start. It's a bit like the Alpha course that we run here at church. And this is a group of soldiers who wanted to explore faith and actually think a bit about God while we're in Iraq. Pop the next slide up. Exactly the same thing happening this time in Afghanistan. People thinking in life and death situations, what is really, really important? What do I believe? What do I not believe? Pop the next slide up. Lovely, right. I'm going to tell you one last story as we finish, and we'll do a quick question and answer session. During my time in Afghanistan, and I'm no good with dates, that was about 4 years ago or something like 5 years ago now, flipping heck. Went out again, working with a medical unit, working with Royal Army Medical Corps, again in a hospital, treating casualties. And one day, again, we had this major medical incident called. We were going to receive multiple casualties. One of them was a US Marine. And he'd been caught in an explosion. And again, I won't go into detail, but he'd basically, the blast had been so severe, he'd suffered what are called catastrophic amputation. So he'd lost both his legs. And because of that, obviously you've damaged lots of blood vessels, tourniquets on, because basically you've got to try and keep as much blood into his body as possible, because of the nature of his injuries, in order to keep him alive. So we were told this casualty was coming to us, and you always know it's bad when the casualty comes into the emergency department, having been evacuated by helicopter, brought straight to us, and the person in charge of the emergency department just looks at them and just goes, operating theatre, straight away. Not even a moment in the emergency department to assess and treat them and this, that and the other. Straight into operating theatre. And I thought, that does not look good. I can't see this as survivable injuries. So I went into the operating theatre, basically to be there, see the medics try and save this person, but it really didn't look likely. Pop the next slide up. This is an emergency treatment unit going on. Doctors, nurses everywhere doing amazing things to try and treat a casualty, try and save this person's life. And you've got this extraordinary team of people doing absolutely amazing things. Now, just pause the story for a moment, because a couple of days before this incident happened, I donated blood. Would just bob the next slide up for us, please? Just like any hospital, you need blood products in order to treat casualties. And I used to love donating blood, except I didn't donate blood. I used to donate platelets, just part of your blood. And it was great because Afghanistan, 40 plus degrees Celsius, again, very hot. The blood donation lab, air conditioned. And by donating platelets, you get wired up to a machine, the blood comes out of you, goes into a very clever machine, spinned round, separated out, etc., etc., etc. They give you the bits back that they don't want, all your red cells, and they keep your platelets. And I, for some reason, produce loads of platelets. So we'll take a double dose from you, David. The great thing is, what that means, 45 minutes in an air-conditioned room with people bringing you tea and cake. It's just fantastic. So brews keep coming, lemon drizzle cake appears, all the food parcels that people send out, they start sharing you with you. Have a lovely chat with your friend. And I'm just donating blood, thinking, you know, what a great day this is. Lemon drizzle cake, nice, cool, air-conditioned room. Happy, happy days. Anyway, that happened a couple of days before this incident. What was amazing, as I'm stood in the operating theatre watching these medics just do extraordinary things, and they managed to save this soldier's life. Incredible skill. We're going to see a picture in a moment. It's not grisly or gory, but I just need to tell you it is of somebody who has lost their limbs, and it's just what they look like afterwards, sat in a wheelchair. If you don't want to see it, just kind of look away now. Pop the slide up, please. There we are. So that's the individual. It's actually not the person I'm mentioning, but it's a similar person with similar injuries, life-changing injuries. You've lost both your legs. But this US Marine survived. Now, when he came to the hospital, basically, we treat them, we get them stable, and then the way that we work is as quickly as you can, they're evacuated once they have some level of stability on an aircraft with amazing skills again, back to a hospital in case the US service personnel, normally in Germany, they get their next bit of treatment. We never, ever heard the next bit of the story. We just dealt with them there and then, the people in front of us, then they're out of here and we don't know what happens next. Except in this incident, we did. Pop the next slide up. And if you happen to have had your eyes shut, not looking, you can open them now. So we sent a photograph of this Marine having received a Purple Heart, a medal that's awarded to American service personnel who've been injured. And there was this lovely, smiley Marine sat up in bed, medal pinned to him, surrounded by kind of his mates. And we got sent a photograph by him and a letter. We'd never, ever got this. And what he said to me, or what he said to us, was, I want to thank you so much for saving my life. I know how bad my injuries were. I know that my chances of survival were so slim. But thanks to your skill and saving my life, you've done something very wonderful for me. And he wrote in this letter, just before I came out to Afghanistan, 2 weeks before I deployed, my first child, my daughter, was born. And thanks to what you have done, my daughter will know her father. And that was just such a moving thing to receive. Just pop the next slide up. And we're back to the blood donation. Because while I'm stood in an operating theatre, seeing this young man, these terrible life-changing injuries, They are putting unit after unit after unit of blood into this person to save their life. During the time that he was in theatre, he received 167 units of blood. Bear in mind, the human body has 8 to 10 kind of units of blood kind of knocking around. So this bloke had at least 16, going on 17 bodies of blood given to him. By the end, they didn't even bother what blood group he was, because he wasn't that blood group any longer. It was just the next unit of blood, the next unit of blood, the next unit of plasma, the next unit of platelets. And while I was in that operating theatre, I saw my platelets put up on a drip stand and given to this Marine alongside a whole load more blood products. But that experience had such a profound effect on me and on my own faith in Jesus Christ. In that moment, I realised, and I don't want to overstate what I did, mine was one blood product or two blood products in amongst 165 other ones. But a tiny little bit of my blood saved his life. So, little advert, if you're not a blood donor, be a blood donor if you can. It's an amazing thing to do. But I saw my blood help save a life. A blood donation done in a lovely air-conditioned room, surrounded by my friends, cup of tea on the go, another slice of lemon drizzle cake, Padre. Oh, well, I think I will. Unbelievably comfortable. But what that experience made me think about was a different blood donation. If you just pop the next slide up. It made me think about Jesus on the cross. The most incredible blood donation in the whole of human history. Me, a couple of bags of platelets. Jesus Christ, every drop of blood in him poured out for all of humanity. Mine done in an air-conditioned, sterile environment. His in the heat of the day outside. Me surrounded by friends, having a laugh and a joke. Him surrounded by crowds of people, shouting abuse, mocking him, pouring scorn upon him. Me, cup of tea, lemon drizzle cake. Jesus, sour wine on the end, in a sponge, on the end of a stick, offered up to him when he says, I thirst. It was just this moment of realizing some links. Tiny blood donation from me saved one life. In Jesus Christ, a blood donation of everything that he had poured out for all of humanity, every person, so that actually we could know our Heavenly Father. Just like that US Marine who says, my daughter will now know her Father. When Jesus died on the cross, poured out his blood, actually it made it possible through that amazing act of love for each and every one of us to have a friendship with our Heavenly Father. I'm going to finish in a moment. I'm conscious of the time. If you'd like to know a little bit more about remembrance, you'd like to know a little bit more about the centenary, the end of World War I, we'd love you. We've got a pile of these at the back of church. It's a booklet called The Silence. It's all about how Remembrance Sunday came into being, all kinds of interesting tales about World War I, some amazing characters, including the story of Noel Shavas. We've got a play coming to this church on the 13th of November, story of his life. We've got replicas of his medals in a case over there. Please, I'd love it if everybody took hold one of these booklets. I'd also love it if you took away a copy of a prayer card given to soldiers in World War I. On one side, it's the Lord's Prayer. On the other side, there is another prayer. Again, it's an exact copy of soldiers, card given to soldiers in World War I. Please, please, please do just take them away. They're absolutely free. Everything about this evening is free. I know some people have talked about the tea and coffee and what have you. If you feel you've got to give some money for whatever reason, there's a plate at the back. You can put something in that, and all that money will give away at the Royal British Legion. I say this is not about making money. This is just about telling some stories. So I want to say thank you so much indeed for coming. Please do take these. If you want to slip away now because you think, it's getting late, I'd like to get home, that's absolutely fine. But equally, actually, if you've got some questions, me and Pete would be only too delighted to answer them. So we'll kind of call a halt there. Do take those booklets, but equally, if you've got some questions, we'd be right glad to hear them. Thank you very much indeed. Oh.
Thank you.
So I say, do feel like you can slip away, but we have got a little roving mic. If there are questions, we will happily take them.
You obviously worked in a very tough area, area of war. Given what you know about what happened in the First World War, how would that situation, those soldiers' conditions, compare with your experience in Iraq?
Absolute luxury we enjoyed relative to the trenches of the Western Front. We had great facilities, great healthcare facilities, rough conditions, but by gum, compared to the trenches of, the Western Front, we were living in palaces.
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, the medical care is just second to none these days. Some of the surgeons that worked in the operating theatres in Basra and in Afghanistan are now the leading experts around the world talking about catastrophic trauma. These guys are just so brilliant at what they do. If you can be in the middle of a desert in Iraq and have an MRI scanner, you're in a good place. Yeah. And I know there was no MRI scanners in World War I.
Okay, another couple of questions.
Can you talk us through your medals, please, both of you?
Oh, heavens.
Oh,
right.
hey.
You've got more than me.
Well, I think we've got 5 each, haven't we?
No, I stopped at 4.
Hey, okay.
I never got the one for getting in the queue first at the NAFI.
So very briefly, the first medal here is for operations in Northern Ireland. They were the early part of my career. I did 6 tours of Northern Ireland. My very first operational tour was West Belfast in 1987, when I became boy to man in 6 months. A very, very scary tour. Next to that is my Iraq medal, 2 tours of Iraq, 2003 and 2008. And then we have these lovely medals here that if you were serving during the Queen's Jubilees, and at the time you got your Jubilee medals.
I did. I got one of them as well.
So I got the silver and the gold Jubilees. I did a lot more years than 12. Yeah. And then the final medal there is what they call a combined operational medal. So if you've served during your army career for more than 3 years on the front line in total, then you get a combined operational service medal. I think my total time on frontline combat was about 4.5 years of my 27 years. That's 4.5 years where people are trying to kill you. So I wear that one with pride as well. So they're my medals.
And I'm, again, Iraq, Afghanistan, Diamond Jubilee. Yep. And then a medal for kind of long service and good conduct.
Yeah.
Don't get photographed by a sign saying no photography in a hospital.
I didn't get that one. You can guess why.
What can I say, Pete? Squeaky clean. 500 condoms for me, please. We'll take perhaps one or two more questions. I don't want to carry on too long. Yeah, if we go to Linda, then we'll come to you, Richard.
We saw the photograph of you with the kids. I always wonder, as soldiers, do you actually make a relationship with the families out there? Obviously, you know, I understand about the insurgents, but there's obviously a lot of civilians out there. Do you actually make any relationships with them?
I think there's a professional boundary that you have to have. You never really know the full story about the people you meet. But actually, we heard a lot of heartbreaking stories of families that suffered, who you did see quite regularly when you were out on patrols and things like that. And I used to have this young lad that every time we was out on patrol, whenever he saw me, he used to come running up to me and give me a hug, and I got to know his name. And what we used to do is we used to carry like a little key ring of photographs from home. It was only about that big, but if you back-to-back your photographs and then put a hole punch in them, and they used to love seeing like our lives outside being a soldier as well. So I would be able to show them pictures of my wife, my children, our house where we live, and they were blown away by this because it kind of gave that reality to them that I wasn't just a soldier. I was a family man as well, and I had family back at home. What they did find was a bit strange was our pet dog, because they don't have pet dogs in Iraq. They're all wild animals, so they can't get their head around you having a pet dog. So yeah, it was very important to make that relationship about family.
And I found, because the hospital I was in Afghanistan, we treated anybody. So our role was life, limb, sight, and your catastrophic injury. So if insurgents came into the hospital who'd been injured and we'd pick them up, they received the best health care that we could possibly give them. And I can remember, I used to work in the mortuary. Again, a slightly grim story, I won't do it, but I used to prepare the bodies for repatriation. I remember 19-year-old soldier who'd been killed, you know, helping sort of prepare his body, go into a coffin to then be sent back to the UK. I remember coming out of the mortuary, which was curiously next to the emergency department, and seeing an insurgent receive incredible medical treatment. And I just felt really proud that actually we had some different values. And actually in Afghanistan, I used to love chatting with the Afghan interpreters. They were smashing blokes. And again, used to go around their tent and have a cup of tea. They had slightly different tea to, you know, Yorkshire tea or Lancashire tea. But I used to have a cup of chai with them and eat almonds and talk to them. And they were charming, charming people. And it's remembering not everybody is a bad guy or girl. Richard, we'll make this perhaps the last question.
This isn't a question, it's a statement from me, and it's with utmost sincerity. Since I started on this journey of interest in history in World War I, I've had the pleasure of taking out 5 different groups to the Somme, to Cambrai. Yeah. Everyone British Army, with the exception one was Royal Navy. Through my interest in HMS Ringtail and the Battle of the Atlantic celebrations that were here at Burscough in 2013, I met a Navy medic, Michelle Ping, who you may have heard of. She would have mentioned in dispatches for putting herself in danger in rescuing a Highlander under fire in Afghanistan. Your talk tonight for me was as being in the company of those people on the Somme, or Michelle Ping, very humbling.
Oh, bless you.
And your humour, the banter, and I said this to you when you were wandering around church encouraging people to come into your talk tonight, that you are, Reverend, you're a breath of fresh air.
Bless you.
Because you see humour and you see the nasty side of life when you let your hair down, and you see the godly side of life. And those soldiers, particularly Y Company, Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, that I had the pleasure of being with for 7 days on the Somme in 2003, their humour and their respect for everything, hearts and minds, in Basra, was an unshakable reminder to me of the good and the necessary to do your job at the same time.
Bless you.
And I'd like to thank you tonight because you really lifted my spirits.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much for coming. Pete and I are going to be hanging around. Please do pick up these kind of mementos. Do have a read of them. Please do pick up the shabby photocopy because we've run out of glossy brochures. Other events happening, commemorative events, films, etc. Do pick up one of those and do invite people along. Do have a look at the exhibition. Bless you. It's been lovely having you this evening. And thank you very much for listening to a couple of crusty soldiers tell a few war stories. Bless you.